Here it comes. Oh boy. Hi everyone, it's 314 Reactor here. Today we're going to be looking at Crysis Remastered. It's on PC, it's now available on the Epic Store. I'm running it with a Core i7 6700K, 32GB of RAM, and an RTX 2080. So let's first off dive into the options and let's have a look at the video settings. So under the main graphics thing, you've got the standard video mode. We're running at 4K. Anti-aliasing quality, I'm running at SMAA 2TX. That is the maximum version that we're running, which I believe is SMAA, also enhanced with some sort of temporal anti-aliasing on top. Window mode is full screen, target display, and display frequency. So this should be able to scale up to 240Hz monitors. Mine's 144, so that's as high as it goes on there. We've got that set, VSyncs on, and then we go to advanced, and we've got everything that's possible to be set to Can It Run Crysis at Can It Run Crysis. The only things that aren't set to that are volumetric, game, and post-processing, and that's because that setting doesn't exist for these for some reason. Other than that, everything else is absolutely maxed out. We have HDR off because the video editing software that I use can't handle HDR and ended up being washed out. So I'm running this without HDR, but the main important thing is that we're going to get a good key in on the performance. So let's go to campaign. Let's go to a new game. Let's play on easy just for the sake of showing off the graphics. And here we go. Alrighty, so straight away we're running at 15 frames a second and we're not even fully in the game yet. And you can probably hear it on the microphone. The fan speed is ramping right up. I'm also going to turn the fans on my case up as well to get as much air in as possible into the case. I'm glad this wasn't released around summer because it's going to get hot.
This is Sky Chief, Red Angels 25, bearing east. Getting some radar interference. Looks like an electrical storm brewing.
That's a negative, Sky Chief. Nothing on our side. Skies are clear. Over.
Roger, Command. Must be a malfunction. ETA to drop zone 3 minutes.
Alright, here we go.
Hey, Nomad, you still with us?
Okay, listen up, gentlemen. Intel reports a significant military presence on the island. We have the element of surprise, so let's use it. The North Koreans can't know we're here.
They won't even know what hit them.
Can it, Psycho? Pay attention. This is a covert operation. Our job is to locate and evacuate. We're not at war here.
Not yet. Oh, Prophet, do we even know if these people are still alive?
That's what we're here to find out. We lost contact with Dr. Rosenthal a week ago when the Korean military locked down the island. 2 days ago, we picked up a distress signal from the team's research vessel. Someone down there wants to be found.
Raptor team, we're beginning approach. Stand by for green.
All right, gear up, masks on. Once we clear the plane, form up on me. Shoots on my mark.
Green in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Go, go, go!
So it looks like they've actually updated the size of the island to actually match what you see in the actual game, which is good.
J-Sox got us chasing archaeologists now. Yeah, this will be a cakewalk.
I've heard of this guy. He must have found something big to buy all of this heat.
Whatever. $50 says this Rosenthal ain't the real reason we're here. Lock it up, team. Stay focused. We got limited intel going in. Outcomes being moved to the USS Constitution. Until they're 5x5, we're on our own. Shoots on my command. Go!
What the hell?
chute's gone. My damn chute is gone. I've got no main, no reserve.
Keep it together, kid. You're over water. Your suit should absorb the impact. Nomad, what's your status?
I'm okay. But my HUD's scrambled.
So we've got the water caustics here. That's new,
No, but you missed
which
the
looks
LZ.
really, really
Way
nice.
to the beach.
On my way.
Did anyone hit the LZ?
You guys are all over the place. Check in. Psycho here.
And first thing you'll notice, I think it's built off the console version that came out for the 360 and the PS3 a few years back, which means it's built off of CryEngine 3. They might have updated it a bit more since then, but you'll see visual stuff like this looks different from the original Crysis and looks closer to Crysis 3. Also, the suit functions are now run by Q, E, and Shift. So you press Q to go into armor mode, E to go invisible, and Shift to run. It means you can mix and match the suit modes better. It's backported from Crysis 2 and 3. In my opinion, it runs a lot better. Now, this does use ray tracing, but it doesn't use hardware accelerated ray tracing, like DXR or Vulkan RT, so it doesn't leverage any RTX hardware. So it's all run, I think, using standard shaders, which is the same as Crytek's demo they did a couple of years ago. So if you look in the reflections here, you'll see that it is reflecting what's off of screen, like ray tracing should, but it's not quite as high quality as you'd think, because as you can see there, it looks a bit blurry, it looks a bit off. It doesn't quite look as good as what hardware accelerated ray tracing would. And also, you don't have the ability to leverage DLSS. I think DLSS 2 could get this up to about 40 frames without really impacting the visual quality. So I don't really know why Crytek went down this route. In my opinion, they should have gone with hardware accelerated ray tracing. But let's move on. Now, as far as I can tell, all the shadowing is all done using raster. And the ray tracing just handles reflections and stuff. It also renders the reflections in a really low resolution. I think 540p. And it doesn't reflect characters either. So it's hardware agnostic. You don't need RTX hardware for this. But it does have its limitations. The game also doesn't have an FOV slider, so I'm not sure what FOV this is currently running at. But it can't be changed, unless there's a way to do it in the console. Let's try it. FOV 104. Nope. So that's a bit weird. Also, with the new suit controls, Q and E running the suit controls means that there's no ability to lean, which was quite a good part of the original Crysis that's now been removed. So that's not so good. Also, quick saving is no longer available, which also kind of sucks. So there's a few trade-offs with this. But let's move on to the classic moment we all remember originally from the demo in 2007.
We spotted KPA patrols down on the beach. Use your binocs to tag them before you run in blind.
I see a large transmitting array. That must be the jamming station.
There's a few things I've noticed here. Earlier on we saw that the water was reflecting things that were off screen. But if you look here at the water, when we move the mountains off the screen, it stops reflecting in the water. And over here you'll see that bits of that tree are actually reflecting in the water there. Now this to me looks like something you'd see with screen space reflections. So I think what's happening is the closer reflections are having ray tracing applied to them, but the more distant reflections are using a form of SSR, which is possibly screen space ray traced. I'm not 100% sure, but I think what that is an optimization, because without hardware accelerated ray tracing, you need to implement certain optimizations to get it to actually run properly. And as we can see here, even now it's running at 18 frames a second. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at this with ray tracing on. This is with ray tracing at max. And now we're going to switch the ray tracing off and see how different it looks. And this is with the ray tracing off. And you can see we've gone up to 26 frames a second. So it's quite a bit smoother. But as you can see, all the reflections in the water are gone. But in some ways it looks a bit better because there's no weird reflection of the branches of that tree in there. Yeah, I'm not sure why. When you turn the ray tracing off, even the screen space reflections turn off in the distance, which possibly means they're screen space reflections that are driven by some sort of screen space ray tracing. I don't know. But it's pretty evident overall that there's been a number of optimizations to the ray tracing. So let's turn it back on. I think you can also note there's a few shading things in there as well. So I noticed that the trees had a bit of extra shading applied to them. So if we go over to this little area here, this is with the ray tracing on, and let's turn it off. I think there may be some global illumination being processed by the ray tracing, so it's not just reflections. So yeah, the ray tracing certainly adds quite a bit to it, but there's quite a few compromises that need to be made because they aren't using hardware acceleration. It does mean, however, that it will be able to use the ray tracing on consoles, which is interesting. How well it will run on PS4 and the Xbox One, I don't know. I dread to think. In the original game, ARM mode was the sort of suit's default mode. And Crysis 2 and onwards, they changed it to be its own distinct mode. Also, another thing I noted was that in the default game settings, when you crank everything up to the top, anisotropic filtering's not on, which is weird, so I had to force that using the drivers. Again, this is running on a 2080, so hopefully next week I'm going to grab a 3090, which hopefully should get us up to about 30 frames a second, hopefully, on this. Oh yeah, the frame rate's really tanking there. So this does look really, really good. So this is 15 frames a second up here. This is running very similar to how it played for me in 2007 on my 7900 GT. From what I've seen, the ray tracing is the big thing here that's really killing the frame rate. So this looks pretty great here. This is where, out on this water here, this is where the limitations of the reflections aren't so obvious. That looks like a pretty beautiful vista. So I think what will be interesting at this point is to take a note of the frame rate. 19, 20 frames a second there. And let's turn everything right down to the bottom settings. So let's turn everything down to low. Hit apply. So we've gone up to 73 frames a second, turning everything down. It doesn't look too bad. It does look quite flat, and the textures look horrendous. I think the low mode on this is pretty close to the low mode that it was in the original game. And I think HDR may even be turned off as well. As in HDR lighting. 123 frames a second looking down there. Ooh, that is really smooth. Let's just turn on the ray tracing on its own. And let's see how much that impacts the graphics without anything else turned up. So, so you need shaders quality on at least high to get ray tracing quality. So let's turn shaders to Can It Run Crysis and ray tracing to Can It Run Crysis, and we'll leave everything else on low. And that's taken us down to 30 frames. So ray tracing by itself takes about 40, 50 frames away with everything else down on low. So yeah, without a doubt, the ray tracing here, I mean, I suppose it's kind of obvious, is what's really hitting the frame rate. So that's really interesting. Again, I think with hardware accelerated ray tracing, that impact would probably be a bit less. And again, as I say, you could leverage DLSS 2. When I ran DLSS 2 on Minecraft RTX, it took the frame rate up from like 17 to about 45, and it still looked basically the same. So it's a shame they haven't implemented it here. Let's crank everything else back up to high again. I dread to think how this will run in the ice levels. I really do, because the ice levels, yeah. So let's skip ahead a little bit. So just looking at the textures here, they look really, really nice. And the parallax occlusion mapping here really gives it that nice bumpy effect. I think that's parallax occlusion mapping. I can actually see the character reflecting in the windscreen there. It's a bit blurry and it's a bit kind of slow to update, but it's there. You can see up close, these rocks, when they're off screen, they're still reflecting. So yeah, it's definitely the closer up stuff is getting the more fuller RTX treatment, and further away stuff is probably getting more SSR. So let's have a look at some of the water caustics. So this is really nice. The sun shafts coming through there, and the caustics on the ground. Let's see how much the ray tracing is actually handling that. So the watercool sticks are all still present with the ray tracing off, so that is all being done in raster. Probably using the same technique that gave the watercore sticks in Crysis 3. So let's get a nice big explosion. Some nice smoke effects there. So this is really heavy, as you can see. The more trees, the more stuff that's going on, the more it's just absolutely killing that frame rate. So those flame effects look quite nice. I think they've been updated a bit as well. Coming from the barrels there. 11 frames a second. And I imagine the amount of rays that are being sent out scales up with the resolution as well. So running this at 4K is really probably what's killing it. So I mean, visually this is quite impressive, but overall I think there are games from today that are more impressive that don't actually use ray tracing, and certainly ones that do use proper hardware accelerated ray tracing, a lot more impressive. That's not to take away anything from... Oh, bit of pop in there, that was a bit weird. I think it's pretty cool. I just think that, you know, I think hardware acceleration and ray tracing is going to be the way forward. You know, just like 3D acceleration was 20 years ago. But overall, it looks pretty good. It has a lot of quality of life things. Again, no FOV slider. Don't know why. That should be in there. But my god, this is just pushing my GPU to the max. But it does look really good, though. The lighting's a lot clearer. The ray tracing is cool. It's not as impressive as RTX, but it's cool. And the suit handling is a lot better. Skipped ahead to the ice level here. How I did that was by going con_restricted and turning that to 0. And then you go map, and then ice, and then hit enter, and that'll take you to this level. So we're at 21 frames a second, which is better than what I thought it would be for the ice level, I must admit. I imagine that because the ray tracing is what takes the majority of the frame rate away, there's probably not a lot of ray tracing actually going on with the ice. And that's why it actually runs better than it was running in the jungle, which is the opposite of how it was in the original game, because in the original game, the ice levels usually ran worse. This area looks a little bit different. I think some of the areas have been reworked, because as I say, this is based off of the first console release of the game, which changes a few maps, and I think skips the VTOL level. So, you know, the VTOL level was pretty cool, I thought. It wasn't popular with a lot of people, but it was removed from the console versions due to RAM limitations, and I don't think it's in this version. So there are a few differences between this and the original PC version, which may be a caveat depending on how much you love the original PC version and what you didn't like about it. I think the thing that's going to annoy people the most is the lack of quick saving. It's all checkpointed now, so if you die and your checkpoint was 10 minutes ago, you're going back, and the lack of FOV slider. I think that's going to annoy people as well. Also, the mouse feels a bit odd. I think it would have been nice if they put the ability to have direct input on, because it doesn't feel like direct input or raw mouse input. It feels like there's a slight bit of acceleration going on. So let's find a nice little place to look over, switch off the RT, and see if we can see any difference with the RT on or off. So this is the snowy bit with the RT on. And this is with the RT off. So we've gone up about 15 frames there. Let's turn it back on. You can see there's a lot more ambient occlusion in the bits of the rock there. So I think that's mainly what's impacting the visuals and the frame rate here. Unfortunately, the aliens are still just as unfun to fight as they were in the original. Oh, that's a bit weird. Just a rock in the air. So let's move on to the level where the huge alien walker is and see how that looks, and then we'll wrap up the video.
I've got orders to get these men down the valley to the evac center.
Another thing that doesn't hold up anymore is the facial animations and the movement. But overall, that's pretty forgivable. The mouse sensitivity on the gun seems to be way over the top. Like, way higher than just normal. So there's a lot of action on screen here, and we're still at around 16 frames a second, so I think it's going to be pretty consistently running in the teens throughout the entire game. Here it comes. Oh boy.
We're pulling everybody out. Get your ass down to the evac center and try and get here in one piece. We can't afford. It's not going down. It just keeps coming. Jesus Christ! Get down! Ah, shit! Pull back! Pull back!
It looks like the machine there is being reflected in the water, but it's not using ray tracing, I don't think. Because when it's off screen, it's not reflecting, as you can see there. So it's reflecting, not reflecting when it's off screen. Whoop. Again, some really nice textures here. Very, very nice. No tessellation though, as far as I can see.
This bastard belongs to me. What about you, Major? I'm a Marine, son! I'll walk on water if I have to. Now get off my fucking island while I draw its fire. Bring it on, you son of a bitch!
I think we can make it. Hold tight.
Strickland!
So that was a look at the Crysis Remaster with ray tracing on. It's pretty good looking, but I think there's just too many caveats by using ray tracing without hardware acceleration. They missed an opportunity there to use RTX. I can't wait to get my 3090 to see how that runs with this, so keep an eye out for that video. Please do like and subscribe, hit the little bell so you're notified of the new videos coming up. There's always new videos on gaming and tech, so keep an eye out for that. Drop a comment on what you think about Crysis Remastered. Will you be buying it? Are you impressed with it? And does it make you want to upgrade your PC? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Nomad, thank God you made it. Take a look at this. One of the pilots brought it in.
Oi, Nomad! Get a load of this ugly bastard!
Yeah.
Okay,
Psycho's
keep it
little
steady.
trophy. Hey, be careful.
The Admiral's nuts bringing this thing on board.
You got something to say, Collins?
No, sir.